Hey everyone, today's topic is property. This is one of the main building blocks of a package policy, and usually it's the first coverage that is covered in a quote, covered in a proposal of ours, and so let's get right to it. You heard in my previous presentation how this is a contract. It is an option contract. And these are no different. This covers property. So let's think about property. Let's start off with building. When you cover a building, you're not covering land, you're not covering the basement, you're typically not covering trees and shrubbery, you're covering the building, all the improvements on top of the land. Now, one of the things you have to be careful about, is this a owner of a building that is the insured, or is this a tenant? If it's a tenant, you need to look at the lease and see what exactly the tenant has to cover per the lease. Some leases require the tenant to cover glass. Now, glass is part of the building, so it's typically covered by the building coverage, which would be landlord's responsibility. If the lease requires tenant to cover glass, shrubbery, outdoor signs, all those kinds of things, make sure that you add by endorsement or a change request those coverages to the policy. What's inside a building is the contents. All those things that are not attached. Ceiling fans are attached. HVAC units are attached. Wall coverings are attached. We distinguish three different types of contents. PPI, which stands for personal property of the insured. PPO, which is personal property of others. And I'm going to add a third category here, which is that personal property of others, which is now in our care, custody, and control, CCC. Think of a dry cleaners. All of the personal property, all of the clothes that are inside American Cleaners aren't owned by American Cleaners. American Cleaners doesn't have title to them. If the building burns down, are they required to repair or replace all of that clothing that's happens to be inside there when it burns down? Is it in their care, custody, and control? And what is the assumption of the agreement when you hand your clothes over to the counter, over the counter to the lady behind, and give those to them to be cleaned? PPI, personal property of insured. Contents, furniture. Sometimes it could be leasehold improvements. If the landlord delivers you a white box and you make all the changes as the tenant, you do the ceilings, you do the walls, etc. Leasehold improvements could be insured. Additional coverages: earthquake, flood, water, and now wind, hail, which we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years, typically written on either a percentage deductible or a flat dollar deductible. Here is a word of caution. We have started seeing two different contracts being used. A percentage of total insured value, TIV, or a percentage of loss. The building is $10 million replacement cost. We are insuring it for $10 million. Total insured value, $10 million. If we had a 10% deductible contract of total insured value, we would have $1 million earthquake deductible, or $1 million flood deductible, or $1 million wind hail deductible, regardless of the amount of the loss. We may only have a $750,000 loss, but we're going to get hit with the full 10% of TIV. The other contract is percent of loss, 10% of the loss. If we had a $750,000 loss, then we're only responsible for $75,000. If you're proposing a policy with additional coverages of earthquake, water, flood, wind, hail, and they have a percentage deductible on them, read the policy, ask the underwriter, is this a percent of loss contract or is this a percent of total insured value? Business interruption. Business interruption has two pieces: business income, extra expense. Let me separate those two. Extra expense first. Your building burns to the ground. You go rent on a short-term basis, 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, another building for your operations until you can get back and your building is reconstructed. The adjuster will ask you for an income statement, a P&L, reflecting all of your expenses the day before the fire, wind, storm, hail, theft, to ascertain how much have you spent for utilities, how much have you spent for rent, how much have you spent for all of your operating costs. All of the expenses above that, the extra expenses, are insurable as part of business interruption. Business income is net pre-tax income that is lost during that 8-month, 12-month period of reconstruction of your building. Again, the adjuster will ask for an income statement that reflects what your income was for 12 months prior to the fire, wind, storm, hail, theft, to ascertain what income you would have expected for the next 12 months, 8 months period of reconstruction had the fire not happened. The combination of the two of those we call business interruption. You can buy just business income or just extra expense. Think of a vending machine company. They have a huge commissary down in the Central West End from which they dispense soda, beer, cigarettes, Lancashire sandwiches, etc. If that commissary burns to the ground, do they have a business income loss or an extra expense loss? Were that the case, I would typically say they do not have a business income loss because their income is generated by the 800 vending machines they have on both sides of the river that continue to dispense whatever it is they're selling. They have an extra expense loss, though, because they need to find another commissary in short order. They need to find inventory on short order, and they're going to pay more for that because it's typically not contract goods. So think about that. You may not need to buy full business interruption. You may only need to buy just business income or just extra expense. The worksheet to determine how much to buy is a bear. Most insureds don't like to fill it out. They may hand you a set of their financial statements and say, you tell me what to buy. That is not our duty. Our duty is to take the exposures from the insured that the insured gives us, take it to the marketplace, get quotes, make recommendations, and propose those to the insured. Don't ever walk through a building and let an insured say to you, well, tell me how much I should insure it for. That is not our job. That's not what our expertise is. Don't get caught in that trap. Two pieces of a property policy. One is what's covered and what's excluded. Remember, the policies are typically what I would call all risk, although you won't see that word, which means they cover everything except for exclusions. So the perils that a typical property policy covers, and there's three types of them: basic, broad, and special form. Special form is the current phrase that we use when we mean all risk. Special form means almost everything except for exclusions. One exclusion is earthquake. Well, we can buy that back. Another exclusion is flood. Well, we can buy that back. Now we're seeing more and more exclusions of wind and hail. We can buy that back with an endorsement. One of the big issues that we're going to see in the next 3 to 5 years is business interruption claims stemming from this pandemic, from this virus. Business interruption claims are triggered by, remember I said last time, look at two things: exclusions and definitions. The contracts and litigation around the contracts really succeeds or fails on those two sections of the contract. Business interruption claims are triggered by actual physical loss to the premises: fire, wind, storm, hail, theft. If there's no actual physical damage to the premises, they voluntarily vacated it. They voluntarily shut it down. Since the late 90s, when the SARS and MERS viruses were rampant throughout the United States, most of the big underwriters have added a virus exclusion to the business interruption. Even more have added what we call civil authority exclusions, which means nothing happened to your building, but a civil authority told you to vacate it. Picture in your mind, if you will, anywhere in the United States, anywhere in St. Louis here, a railroad track and buildings near a railroad track. Railroad flying down those tracks filled with phosphate. As you know from the Oklahoma City bombings, phosphate is one of the two ingredients that are used in making homemade bombs. A tanker load, a carload of phosphate falls off the tracks and happens to be right next to your client's building. And the civil authorities set up a 2-mile cordon around there and tell everybody to evacuate. If you don't have a civil authority exclusion on your policy, you may be able to make a business interruption claim. If you do have a civil authority exclusion, you probably won't. Remember, I was talking about contracts. The very first page is that declaration page telling you the name of the insured, policy term, limits, deductibles, etc. Generally, in the first 2 or 3 pages of a policy, you will see a list of forms and the associated number of that form. One of the good things to look at is just that list and see, did they put a civil authority exclusion on there? Did the underwriter put earthquake back on and charge us for it, etc.? Special perils is the same as all risk except for exclusions. One last distinction I want to make for you. Again, particularly in this period of pandemic where we have buildings that are unoccupied. There is a difference between unoccupied and vacant. Unoccupied means the utilities are still on. Regularly, once a week, once a day, somebody is going by to check on the premises. Lights go on and off, doors work, etc. Uninhabited is the same as habited for most 99% of property contracts. Vacant is something different. Vacant is utilities turned off, windows boarded up, doors locked. If you have a property insured under a special form, there is probably in the terms and conditions a section that says if the building becomes vacant, then we will no longer give you special form perils, which again, think all risk except for exclusions, but instead we're probably going to give you named perils, and the biggest peril that you're going to lose is vandalism. So if anybody, again, in the middle of this pandemic, something happens and the underwriter or the adjuster declines a claim and says, no, it's vacant, everybody's home, you say, no, it's unoccupied. It is not vacant. Again, thank you for your time. Let's set up a Zoom in the next couple of days. And what I'm thinking is maybe Friday morning at 9 o'clock. And let's ask some questions about property, anything that you're thinking about, the various forms, and we'll knock that one out. The next one coming up is the Comprehensive General Liability Form, the CGL, and we'll talk about that one. Okay, have a great week. Have a great weekend. Talk to you soon. Bye.